think it's on.
Okay. That's good enough. I hope that everyone can hear. Before I share my message this morning, I just want to take a moment and just say how wonderful it is to see people contributing to the ministry of the church the way we are right now. I don't know, it just seemed to hit me pretty hard this morning when I realized we have people that are very willing to share in the leading of worship. We have our music people, we have the girls who took up the collection. I mean, people are just very willing to take a part in things, and it's just wonderful to see that happening. I just hope we can all continue to look at ways that we can share our gifts and our talents and our abilities to see that the ministry of the church continues in a very successful way. One Sunday morning, an old cowboy entered a church just before services were about to begin. Now the old fellow, his clothes and himself were just immaculately clean, although he had on a pair of rather worn jeans and an old flannel shirt, had on boots that were very rugged and ragged, and in his hand he clutched a hat that was well worn, and in the other hand a well-worn Bible. He entered the church and he thought this was the most beautiful church he had ever seen, and he wanted to visit there. The church was in a very exclusive and upscale part of the city, and when he entered he noticed the beautiful environment that the church had. But as he came in and took his seat, he realized that people were not being very friendly to him. In fact, they shunned him and they avoided him. As he took a seat in one of the pews, people actually moved away from him. He looked at them and realized that they were dressed in the finest and the most exclusive clothing that they could afford. And they had accessories to match. Well, no one paid any attention to the cowboy. The preacher delivered a fine sermon filled with fire and brimstone, and even ended with a plea to the congregation to give more money so that they could improve their church structure even to a greater degree. After the service was over, the preacher approached the cowboy, and he said to him, "We're glad you're here, but if you choose to come back and worship with us again, I have a suggestion for you." The cowboy said, "Oh, what is that?" And the preacher said, "I would suggest that you have a conversation with God and ask God to advise you about what the proper attire is to wear in our church." The old cowboy said, "I'll do that." Next Sunday came along. Cowboy was back, same clothing, immaculately clean, but very well worn. Again, he was avoided. Again, he was shunned. Again, he was ignored. After the service was over, the preacher approached him again and he said, "I thought you were going to have a conversation with God about what to wear when you came back to our church." And the cowboy said, "I did." And the preacher said, "Well, if you had that conversation with God, what did God tell you to wear?" Preacher said, "God told me he didn't have a clue what to advise me to wear because he had never been here." How? A little bit maybe extreme, but I chose that little story because I think it has a lot to do with what Paul is telling us in this letter to the Philippian church. Paul was giving a testimony. Now, those of us who have had lots of experience in various churches of varying degrees of, what would I say, emotionality perhaps, that people, some churches depend on the testimony of people to kind of liven up their service, we might say. Testimonies where people would actually stand up in the pew and give some sort of a testimony, an accounting of what God had done in their lives. And we've all heard those. Sometimes they can get very emotional. Well, Paul was one of those, I think, especially in this section that Corey read to us from Philippians 3. Paul is saying that God had done such wonderful things in his life. And he used a lot of expressive language in telling us about that. He even referred to what he had done before as rubbish, because what is happening now is so glorious and great. That's testimony. Now, I'm not saying whether or not we should be jumping up in our pews and doing that, but I do think that Paul had a definite message for us this morning to think about, especially as we approach communion today. Paul's testimony serves as a wake-up call, I think, to take stock of ourselves and just where we are in our faith. Now, Paul goes back through what he had done. He went to his early days of his zeal of basically persecuting the Christians at that particular time, because he felt like that was the right thing to do. Then when he discovered Jesus Christ, he was also talking about that. He said that was a wonderful time in his life. That was obviously a life-changing experience when he discovered Christ. But then he said that wasn't quite enough. He went ahead and said that was not satisfying enough just to learn about Jesus Christ and just to take Christ into his life. No, he said we have to go beyond that. We have to become the kind of people that are active in the faith. We have to carry it forward. We have to keep it moving, not let it sit somewhere on a shelf. Paul was actually looking back on his life and kind of taking stock of what he had done. Back in the days when there was pay phones that people actually used, a storekeeper was noticing that a little boy had come in and was using the pay phone near the entrance to the store. And he couldn't help but hear the conversation because the payphone was right out there in the middle of everything. And the boy proceeded, after he put his money in the phone and made a connection, he proceeded with a conversation that went something like this. Of course, we're hearing only one side of it. The little boy is saying, "Sir, could you use a lawn boy to mow your yard and rake your leaves?" "Oh, okay, you already have one." "Well, is he doing a good job for you?" "I see, you like what he's doing very much. Well, I just thought I'd ask. Thank you, sir. Goodbye." And he hung up the phone. The storekeeper said to the boy, "Well, I'm sorry you didn't get that job." And the boy said, Oh, I already have the job. I was just checking up on myself." And that's what Paul is telling us to do. We need to back up and check up on ourselves and see where we are with that faith that we have within us. You know, we have the faith, but what are we doing with it? Are we carrying it forward? Got to share another story with you. Parents of a 5-year-old boy were awakened one night because of a loud noise in the little boy's bedroom. They ran over to the room to see what happened and discovered that the little guy had fallen out of bed. Now, he was okay, no damage done, everything was all right. And after they comforted him a little bit and got him back into bed, the little boy looked at him and said, "Well, I guess I fell asleep too close to where I got in." That's a testimony to our faith today. That's what we have to guard against. And that's the instruction that Paul is giving to us. I think one of the reasons I appreciate Paul's comments here so much this morning is because he's talking, we could say preaching to the choir, he's talking to the group of people who have a faith already established in their lives. Us, all of us, who call ourselves Christians. And he's saying to those people, it's not enough just to crawl in, just enough to get in. You need to do more with it. Moving forward in Christ, maybe we could say. Moving forward so that we can become the kind of active faith people that God expects us to be. Paul goes on to say, and I love these words, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead. In other words, he's talking about this great race, if we want to call it, the great prize, whatever we want to call that. But it brings us into the idea of the winning attitudes of determination and discipline. Paul said, I pressed on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. You see, our faith, as Paul's faith, moves us into a new motivation of Christ-like works. A winning athlete doesn't win the race by listening to a lecture about how to win the race. A winning athlete doesn't win the race by watching a movie or reading a book about how to win the race. He or she wins the race by getting into the race with a disciplined determination to win. Now, if we want to be a winner in the race of Christianity, we must, with a spirit of disciplined determination, put our energy into the right focus and effort into what we're doing for the mission of Christ. I happen to believe that communion is a good place to start. Communion is an active thing because we need to come to it. We need to accept it. So today, in just a few moments, we will be offering the opportunity for all of us to commune with God once more, to take that resurrection through death of Jesus Christ seriously once again. So as Paul instructs us to head toward that prize, to see beyond what Christ has done through death and to see the resurrection, we need to have an opportunity to actively engage in something that symbolizes our belief and our faith that Christ has died for us, that Christ lives for us, and that we're very willing to move forward with our actions. So let us make an active faith as we contemplate the communion we are about to share. We'll hear our choir sing a motivation for us as we are drawn to that time in our service.